Hi, my name is Sandy and I am from Cookies Kakery. Welcome to today's buttercream class. So today I am going to be showing you exactly how I make my buttercream cakes. This class is exactly what I teach in my one-to-one classes. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I actually make up my buttercream. Now with buttercream, it's one of those things where it can make or break your cake. The consistency has to be correct. And for my buttercream, the only ingredients that I use are, so I've got icing sugar, which is my go-to brand, which is Silver Spoon, unsalted butter. Now for a 6-inch cake, which we're going to be making today, the ratio that I use is 375 grams of butter to 750 grams of icing sugar. So I use a 1-to-2 ratio. I've got some unsalted butter here, which is quite soft. So I've popped it in the microwave for 10-second bursts. Just keep an eye on it. You don't want to put it in the microwave for too long because it could risk it melting fully. So you just want to keep an eye on it and do it in short bursts. I have got some milk. So in here, I have just got 3 tablespoons of milk. And the most important tip I can give you here is make sure it's at room temperature. So I've just taken it out of the fridge. I've popped it in the microwave just for like 10 seconds just to get it to room temperature. And the only other ingredients that I'm going to be using today is vanilla. Obviously, if you're going to be making a lemon cake, you can put lemon. If you're making almond, you can put some almond flavoring in there. So we're going to stick to just some vanilla extract today. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to beat the butter for 6 minutes until it's nice, pale and fluffy. And I've got my stand mixer here, which is what I use. By all means, if you've got a handheld whisk, feel free to use that. I just find this a lot easier to work with, so I can go off and do other things. So I'm just going to bring in my stand mixer. And I am going to mix this on a medium speed for 6 minutes. Okay, so my butter has been going for about 6 minutes now. And I'm just going to scrape it off the paddle. Also, your stand mixer will come with a whisk attachment and it will come with a paddle attachment. I never ever use the whisk attachment. It's just because the whisk will incorporate way too much air into your buttercream, which can cause air pockets and air bubbles. So we use the paddle mixer for the buttercream. And now, as you can see, the buttercream has gone to a really nice pale, fluffy kind of consistency. But when I hold my spatula, it's still holding its shape. It's not literally falling off. That's because the butter was the correct softness. If it is kind of falling off your palette knife or your spatula, it just means that your butter was probably too soft to begin with. So what you can do is you can pop it into the fridge just to firm it up a little bit. And if it's to the point where it's way too hard to move around, that just means that your butter was probably too hard to begin with. And again, you can put it into a microwavable bowl, pop it into your microwave for like 5-second bursts just to soften it up. But ideally, you just want it to be a nice soft consistency. I'm now going to go in and add in my icing sugar. Now I'm going to do this in 2 parts. So we're going to add in 750 grams of icing sugar, and I'm going to do half the batch first, and then I'm going to let it mix for 30 seconds. I'm then going to go in with the next batch. So I'm just going to measure out on my scale. Also, one of the questions I get all the time is, do I sift my icing sugar? I never ever sift my icing sugar. I just don't feel like it makes any difference whatsoever. And this is the messy part. So this is where you're going to get a cloud of icing sugar everywhere. So that's my first batch that's gone in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop on the lid of my stand mixer, which is like the guard, and I'm going to do this in really short bursts. Otherwise, if I put it on to a medium speed straight away, it's just going to literally cloud everywhere, which is what we don't want. And I've made that mistake many a time. So I'm just going to go in very just going to pulse the stand mixer just until that's incorporated in. And I'm just going to literally let that mix in for about 20 seconds. I've got my milk here ready as well. So we are going to go in with some liquid once we've put in the second batch of icing sugar. And at this stage, we just want to go to a kind of like a low to medium speed. We don't want to put this on a really high speed. Again, if we put it on a high speed, we're just going to end up with loads of air pockets and air bubbles. You're going to probably get some in American buttercream anyway, but this just kind of reduces it and eliminates it a little bit. So I'm then going to go in with my second batch of icing sugar. And the reason we do this in 2 batches is because it just allows it to incorporate a bit better, rather than putting it all in one go and then it's just not incorporated or mixed into the butter that well. Okay, so I've got my second batch in there, and again, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to literally pulse it just until that's mixed in. And again, we're going to just let that mix for about 20 seconds before we go in with some liquid. And if you've got a KitchenAid, the setting I'm using is a number 4 on my stand mixer at this point. Now with the milk, as I mentioned earlier, please do make sure that it is at room temperature, especially in the winter. If this is cold from the fridge and you put this into your buttercream, it's just going to stiffen up the butter again, and we don't want it to be too stiff, otherwise it won't go onto your cake nicely. So this is 3 tablespoons in here. I'm going to go in gradually. So a little bit at a time, just let it mix up. And I'm going to go in with half a tablespoon of vanilla. And I'm just going to let that mix for a further minute. So in total, your buttercream should be taking you around about 8 minutes, and a majority of that is going to be whipping up your butter. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to mix around the side of the bowl. So sometimes you can still have icing sugar, which is around the outside of the bowl. So I'm just going to go ahead and just make sure it's nicely incorporated. And also just scrape underneath the bowl as well, because that's sometimes where we can have icing sugar at the bottom of the bowl. Okay, and I'm just going to let that mix for a further 10 seconds. Again, on a low to medium speed. And there you have your lovely, fluffy, creamy buttercream for your cake. So we are now ready to decorate our cake, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the basic tools that you're going to need. These are things that I've used over the last 10 years that have always worked for me. I don't believe in buying overly expensive things, so everything here is within kind of reasonable budget. They're not top range items, and they work perfectly fine. What I have firstly got here is my turntable. This one here is by PME. It's a good one because it doesn't kind of slide around too much, so it's a really good one. And it just comes in one standard size. I've then got my cake leveler, which is by PME as well. This is 18 inches long, and this is great. It's a tool that I definitely would highly recommend in your cake kit. I am then going to be using an acrylic scraper. Now, when you buy your scraper, just make sure that it is 10 inches tall, because you want it to be taller than your actual cake. Otherwise, it's just going to be really difficult to ice. I have then got a palette knife. Now this one in particular is by Ateco, and if you would like the model number for this, this one is 1386 and it's the perfect size. So I've struggled to find a decent sized palette knife. They're either way too big or too small. This one is a perfect size. And then I just use a cranked palette knife, which is a small cranked palette knife just for the top of the cake when we do the top to get our sharp edges. And what I'm going to be using to present my cake on is a white gloss masonette board. These are really brilliant because you can actually wipe them around if you do get buttercream around the board, and they just look a lot nicer than your standard foil silver drums. So let's get started. Now the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our sponge. So I've just got two 6-inch sponges here, which we're going to actually split into half. So they're quite deep sponges. This is about 2.5 inch deep. And I'm going to get my PME cake leveler. And this leveler has got these little indentations on the side, so you can adjust it to the height of your cake. So because this is 2.5 inches deep, I know that I need to set it on a 17 from the bottom, so on the 17th little notch. Now the way we use this is both of the legs need to be firmly pushed down on the table. And what you want to do is placing your hand on top of your sponge, we're going to go back and forth in almost like a sawing motion. And obviously sponge is very fragile. So as you come to the end of the sponge, what you want to do is just place your hand towards the end and just go very slowly, because you don't want to risk breaking your sponge. And I'm just going to remove the top. So just going back and forth, and as you come to the end, just go very slowly. And that just gives you a nice flat top. We're then going to split these into half. So I'm going to go ahead now and just adjust my leveler. And I'm just going to put this on a 7 from the bottom, just because I know the height of this cake. Okay, and I'm then going to go ahead and split this into 2 layers. So we end up with 4 layers. Now my cakes are always 4 layers. I don't believe in doing anything less than that. I think a tall cake looks really nice. Okay, so then you end up with 4 layers of sponge, which is exactly what we need. They're all equal heights as well. So when you're kind of cutting into the cake, you're going to get a really nice looking cake with even layers as well. So I'm just going to move these to one side. Just get rid of any crumbs. I'm then going to bring in my turntable with my board. And what we're going to do is I'm going to bring in the buttercream now that we'd prepared earlier. And the very first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to grab a tiny bit of buttercream and I'm just going to place it onto the board. Now, all this is doing is it just acts as a glue for the first layer. Especially in transport and things like that, you just really want to make sure that it's nicely secured down onto the board. Now, I'm going to get my first layer and I'm going to place it in the center of the board. Now do make sure that it is in the center of the board. It's quite easy to not have it in the center, and obviously by the time we've kind of finished decorating, you realize that your cake is way off and it's not in the center. So just make sure that it is in the center. And also what you might find is as you start layering this with buttercream, you might find that your cake kind of shifts over there. So really do keep an eye on it, because at this stage it's really easy to just simply move it back, even up to crumb coat stage. But once you've kind of finally iced it and you've decorated it, there's no chance of kind of moving it back, and it's really disheartening when your cake is not in the center of the board. So just be aware of that. So I'm just going to move that back. Again, just turn your turntable, make sure it is in the center. Now I'm going to start layering this with the buttercream. So I'm just going to pick up some buttercream. Now we never touch the sponge. We're just going to gently throw the buttercream down. And just make sure you've got enough buttercream on here so it's easy to move around and we don't end up touching the sponge, because we want to eliminate any kind of bits of cake in this area on the palette knife. So now the way we do this is I'm just going to go back and forth, and just until we've covered the cake. And I'm just being very careful not to touch the sponge, because again, if we do touch the sponge, we're going to end up with lots of crumbs in our buttercream. And then what we want to do is I just want to make sure that this is nice and flat and level. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold my palette knife at a very slight angle, and there's a very, very slight kind of gap there. Now, I'm not going to move this arm at all, and I'm not moving my palette knife, but I'm just moving my turntable. And what that's going to do is that's just going to give me a nice flat top. Don't worry about any overhang on the side. That's absolutely fine, because we're going to use that for our crumb coat anyway. I'm then going to pick up my second layer. And again, just turn your turntable. Just make sure it is sitting in line with the first layer of sponge. Make sure your cake is still in the center. And again, I'm just going to pick up some buttercream. And I'm just going to go back and forth. It's almost like a waving motion. And then I'm just going to go back and forth the other way. And then I just want to get my cake nice and flat. So I'm just going to angle it again slightly. Again, I'm not moving this arm at all. I'm simply moving my turntable. And we're just going to get a nice flat top. Going with the next layer. Again, just make sure it's nicely lined up and sitting straight on the other layers. I always wipe my palette knife as well before I start to move it, because I find that if there's buttercream on your palette knife, sometimes it can kind of stick to this buttercream and it just makes a bit of a mess. And this is also why it's so important for your buttercream to be nice and soft, because if this was too firm now, you would find it very difficult to move your buttercream around the cake. It will just tear your sponge. So again, I'm just going to make this nice and flat and level. And I'm just going to get my last layer. Now for this, we're going to use the bottom side as the top, because it's already got the crumbs encased. And I just want to make sure that's sitting nicely in line with the other layers. Okay, and that is absolutely fine. So we're then going to go in with a crumb coat. But before we actually go in with a crumb coat, we're going to take out some of this buttercream and put it into a separate bowl, because we are going to end up getting a lot of crumbs in this bit and we don't want crumbs in the final layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. So I've just put a small amount into a bowl here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start to use the outside of this buttercream, which was already kind of hanging over. Now the correct way to hold your palette knife is your elbow goes up in the air, and then we're going to work to the opposite side of your elbow. Now this is the most easiest way that I find to hold a palette knife. I often see people trying to work in front of them at a really kind of awkward angle, and it just doesn't work. So elbow up in the air, and then we're just going to simply start to go back and forth. And all I'm doing at the moment is I'm just basically getting rid of the excess buttercream, and I've just smoothed it around the cake. And as you can see, lots of crumbs in here, so this is why we always put it into a separate bowl. Now, the crumb coat is essentially just sealing in all your crumbs. So this is not going to look perfect at this stage, and it doesn't need to. It's just sealing in your crumbs. And we want a really thin layer of buttercream where you should be able to see your sponge through the buttercream. So we're not aiming for full coverage here. This is simply just to seal in your crumbs. Also, what I like to do is if I find my cake is a little bit kind of moving and sliding, I just like to hold it very gently at the top and then go ahead and just start to kind of move it. Also, I should mention here that we always do the sides first. Now, this is because there's chance and risk of your cake moving as you start to crumb coat. So once we've crumb coated the sides, we can stand back, have a look, and just make sure it's still in line. If it's moved, we can easily place our hand on the top and just move it back into place. Now, if there's buttercream around the top, it's going to be really hard to do that. So this is why we do the sides first. If it's then moved, we just move it back into place, and then it's not as messy as it would be. And just get any bits that haven't got buttercream on there, so just some at the bottom there. So again, I'm just doing this kind of waving motion. It's just like back and forth. So I've got my sides all covered now, okay? Now my cake looks fairly straight and fairly level, but if it's not, you can just move it back into place. And then we're gonna go ahead and just add a little bit of buttercream around the top. Again, just a really thin layer. And then again, I'm just gonna go back and forth, just as I did when I was filling the cake with buttercream. And what you wanna do is you wanna go over the edge. So can you see there's a slight kind of lip there? So we're just gonna go over the edge. And then I'm gonna just turn my turntable as I did when I filled the cake, just to get a nice flat top. And then this overhang with my palette knife, I'm just gonna bring that so the lip ends up coming up. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just grab my scraper and we're just gonna take off any excess now. Now, this is the most important thing, and holding your scraper and how you angle it is very, very important. So at this stage, I'm angling it at like a 45-degree angle. So we're not using this bit to scrape. It's actually kind of like, I would say like 5 mils of the scraper of the side. And what we want to do is that basically I'm going to just in one full turn now. So I'm putting my hand, I'm crossing my hands over, and I'm going to move my turntable, just making sure you're holding your scraper nice and straight, and we're just going to take off any excess. And then just to neaten around the lip on the outside, I'm just going to bring this in towards me. And there you have your crumb coated cake. So what I'm going to do now is with my crumb coated cake, I'm just going to pop this into the fridge for about 15 to 20 minutes, just so it's nice and set and firm, and then we will be ready to do the final coat of the cake. So whilst the cake is chilling, what we're going to do is with the remaining buttercream, I'm just going to add some pink colouring to this, just to make it a little bit more exciting. So we're going to go in with a nice kind of baby pink, and what I do is I add some of this, which is Caramel. I absolutely love Caramel. I find that this incorporates a lot easier into the buttercream. Sometimes the sugar flare gels or the other thicker gels, they can kind of leave streaks. You've really got to make sure it's mixed into the buttercream well. But also the great thing about Caramel is you can color chocolate in with this because it's an oil-based food coloring. You can use sugar flare in chocolate, however, you will need to add a tiny bit of oil, otherwise it will seize up your chocolate. So when we're doing things like chocolate drips, you really want to be using something oil-based like Caramel. They come in various different colors, or just go ahead and add in a tiny bit of oil into your chocolate, which would be absolutely fine. So a little bit goes a long way. I'm simply just going to add some color into the buttercream, and I'm going to pop this into my stand mixer just for about a minute on a very, very low speed, and I'm going to put it on a number 1 because again we don't want to incorporate too much air into the buttercream at this stage. We want to eliminate the amount of air pockets and air bubbles. So I'm just going to pop that on a number 1 setting on my KitchenAid, literally just for a minute until the colors are all incorporated. So my cake has now been chilling for about 20 minutes, and I've taken it out of the fridge, and it's nice and chilled, firm to touch, and nothing is coming off on my hand, which means the buttercream has set really, really nicely. And I've gone ahead and put the color into my buttercream, and we've just ended up with a really nice baby pink. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to start applying the final layer. Now this coat is going to be a lot thicker than we did for the crumb coat, and we start on the top this time rather than the sides because there's no kind of risk of it moving around now because it's been chilled in the fridge. So what we want to do is we're just going to get some buttercream and we're just going to place it on the top. You want a fair amount. And what you want to do is, again, you're just going to start going back and forth. And we're just going to let the buttercream go around the outside of the cake. So almost creating like a lip just on the outside of the cake. And then I'm just going to level that off. So again, I'm not moving this arm. I'm just moving my turntable. We're just going to get a nice flat top. And once we've got a flat top and we're happy with that, we're then going to start working around the sides of the cake. What we want to do here is we want to grab some buttercream and we want to actually start a little bit higher up. So we're almost creating like a lip going around the top of the cake, as you can see here. And we're just going to do that all the way around. Now the key here is just to put on a little bit at a time in a small section. We don't want to put this buttercream on and spread it around too much around the cake because it's just going to thin out the coat and you'll start to see your sponge. So we just want to little sections at a time. And once you've gone around the top, we're then going to start going around the middle. Again, just very small sections at a time. And again, just be conscious of how you're holding your palette knife. So again, I've got my elbow up in the air and I'm just working to the opposite side. It just makes it so much easier to work with. So once I've gone around the middle, I'm then going to start working on the bottom of the cake. And once I've done the bottom, I'm just going to go around the cake, just turn it around, make sure there's enough. And then what I like to do is I like to do another coat around the top of the cake again, because that's where we most of the time get the gaps. So I'm just going to go around the top of the side again, just to make sure we've got enough buttercream on there. So really, you want to add on enough buttercream because we're going to be taking off the excess anyway. So you just want to make sure you've got enough on there. And I've also got that lip going all the way around the top. We are then going to start to scrape off the excess. So I'm going to grab my scraper. We want to put 4 fingers at the back here and the thumb just behind the scraper. Now the most important thing here is make sure you are holding it straight. It's very easy to kind of tilt it a little bit like that without realizing, and then you end up with a tapered cake. So we don't obviously want that. So the first thing we're going to do is just spread out your fingers a little bit. And we're going to hold it at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to just cross my hands, and with very kind of medium pressure, I'm just going to turn my turntable, and we're just going to take off the excess. Let me just show you what we don't want to do. So I did 1 full turn there. We don't want to go in very small sections. Can you see what's happened there? We've ended up with lots of lines. So the key really here is to try and do long turns and long strokes so we don't end up with lots of kind of start-stop lines. Now we're just going to keep doing that. Stand back, just make sure your sides are nice and straight. Now, once you've started to take off the excess, I can see here now, I don't want to really take off too much because we just want to simply start to smooth it out now. But here I can see I need to add some more buttercream. So I'm just going to go ahead and put some more buttercream there. And you'll see if there's any kind of gaps around the cake, and that's where you just want to go ahead and add your buttercream. And again, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing now. Just going to take off the excess. I'm just going to show you this way, just so you can see just how I'm scraping it. So as I'm moving the scraper, I'm moving my turntable at the same time. And as you can see, it's starting to get nice and smooth. But again, here, I just need to add some more buttercream just because there's a gap there. And it's starting to get nice and smooth. Now I just want to show you how we go ahead and fix up any small gaps around the top of the cake. So can you see I've got some here? So we've created this lip, and there was a reason that we created this lip. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to basically angle my scraper as we did when we were filling the cake, and I'm just going to go around and let this lip come around the outside of the cake again. So I'm just going to do that until we get a nice lip and we've got a nice flat top. And then what we want to do with our scraper is this lip that's coming around, we want to basically push this up. And we're going to do that by just putting very, very light pressure around the cake. And we're going to, again, cross our arms. So we're just going to cross the arms, and we are just going to lift this lip up. So can you see it's gone from being outside and it's just pushed it up? And we're just going to keep doing that now until the cake has smoothed out. And as you can see now, it's literally filled any of the gaps around the top of the cake, and that's exactly what we wanted. And I think the trick and the key with American buttercream is knowing when to stop. So when it starts to look nice and smooth, it is very easy to get kind of air bubbles and air pockets. So it's just kind of knowing when to stop. Now I'm putting the most lightest pressure. I'm not really taking off any excess now. I'm just trying to smooth it out. I'm just going to stand back, just make sure it is nice and straight. Nice long turns. And then I'm going to give it one now, a final turn, just to kind of get rid of any lines that might be on the cake. And I am happy with that. So we've got a nice straight cake. And all we want to do now is we just want to get rid of this lip around the top. And this is where our cranked palette knife comes in. So all we want to do here is we just want to, in very, very small bite sizes, literally just pull in towards yourself. And we end up getting this kind of nice sharp edge here. just wipe as well every time you do take some off. Otherwise, you're just going to risk the buttercream going around the cake and it's just going to look really messy. And I'm just going to smooth the top a little bit. So we are going to have a chocolate drip going around the top of the cake. So we're never ever too worried about the top of the cake. That's all going to be covered with chocolate drip and flowers, etc. There you have your nice smooth buttercream cake with straight sides and a level top. And we are now going to start decorating this. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a chocolate drip on the cake and we are going to add some macarons and some flowers. So we're now coming on to our drip. So I've just popped the cake into the fridge, literally just for 5 minutes, just to firm up. I've got my white chocolate here. Now this is a really good quality chocolate. This is a Belcolard Belgian chocolate. I'm literally just going to pop a handful into a microwave. I don't usually measure it, but I've just got a small bowl, literally a handful, and that's enough for one cake for a drip. And I'm going to melt this for 1 minute in the microwave. I'm going to take it out, give it a stir, and then pop it back in for another 30 seconds until it's all fully melted. So the cake is out of the fridge now. It's just had time to kind of firm up just for about 5 minutes. And also I have melted the white chocolate, so it's nice and runny. Now with some supermarket brands, what you might find is when you melt the chocolate on its own, it's really kind of stiff and it's not as kind of runny as this one. A little tip there is just to add maybe some cream to it or add a tiny bit of oil, but because this is a really kind of good quality chocolate, I don't have any issues. I don't add any cream or anything to it. Now we're going to go with a kind of ivory drip here. Now because this is quite a yellowy tone as white chocolate is, we're going to add in some calomel. Okay, so I'm just simply going to add in a few drops of the calomel. And this is just basically going to really whiten it up. So just a little squeeze there and you will noticeably see the difference in the colour. Now you can also add calomel into your buttercream as well. So if you wanted to lighten the buttercream and you find that your buttercream is a little bit kind of yellowy, you can add some of this calomel to it. It absolutely works wonders. And again, because this is oil based, we don't need to add any oil to this. So can you see the difference? It's just gone a really nice ivory color. Now for our drip, we simply use a good old spoon. I don't use piping bags or bottles. I find that the spoon you have most control with. And what we're going to do is we're just going to use the tip of the spoon to actually do the drip. I hold my bowl over and I'm just going to, don't worry if it goes around the top of the cake because this is going to be covered. With the point of my spoon, I'm just simply gonna put some chocolate and let it drip down. And I should get about 3 drips from 1 spoon. And then just come back, just so you're not getting chocolate on the rest of the cake. And just spread them out a little bit. I think they look a little bit nicer rather than too close together. And as you can see, there's a lot of control with the spoon as well. I used to use squeezy bottles, but what I found with those, they were an absolute nightmare to clean and wash because the chocolate would harden. And I just prefer doing it with a spoon. Okay, and then with the rest of the chocolate, what we're going to do is we are just going to pour it into the center. And we're just going to start to spread that out around the top. Just be careful it doesn't come over too much because you don't want to create any more drips. We're just simply just trying to cover the top of the cake. And then just to get it to look a little bit pretty, I'm just going to use the point of my spoon. I'm just going to turn my turntable as I start to come in just to create a bit of a spiral effect. And there we have our drips on the cake. And then what I've got is I've just put some of the remaining leftover buttercream into a piping bag. Now my piping bags are they're just like disposable ones. I get these from eBay. Find where you want the front of your cake to be. Obviously, we're always going to have a nice side of a cake and a not so nice side that we're not happy with. So I'm happy with this. We're going to have that as the front of the cake. And I've got some flowers here. So I think 3 flowers on this size cake at the top is a really good number. Now these flowers here are from a company called Village Green Floristry. They're absolutely amazing. The most important thing here is we never ever insert anything into a cake which is not food safe. So these come with stems with wires in. I've actually taken out the stem with the wire. I've just got like a bamboo stick, and this has got just an area for me to insert the bamboo stick into, and that makes it food safe. So I can now go ahead and put this into the cake, and I'm just going to do it for this one. And I'm just going to break it to size just so I can put that into the cake. So I like to position my flowers. The first one I like to go in about 2 inches from the side at an angle, and I'm just going to push that down. I don't push it down too much. I think it looks a little bit nice just coming away from the cake. The next one I'm going to go in at an angle around the front. And then the next one just in the center, just straight down. So no angle this time, but I like to go straight down, and you just get a nice kind of cluster of flowers here. So that is going to be the front of my cake. I'm then going to go in with some macarons because I absolutely love macarons on a cake. I'm just going to simply just put a tiny bit of buttercream, and I'm going to place one just on the side here on the board. Just be really careful when you're placing macarons because they can be quite fragile. I'm then going to place a little bit of buttercream just on the side here, and I'm going to stand one macaron up. And I'm then going to go in with just some smaller couple of flowers here, which I think look really, really lovely on the board. So I'm going to go ahead and just place a little bit of buttercream just on the end here, and I'm just going to pop that down. And I've then got another kind of smaller one here, and again exactly the same thing, just some buttercream, and I'm just going to place it on the side there. And as I said before, these boards are amazing because then you can go ahead now and wipe away any kind of buttercream or chocolate that is on the cake. And there you have your finished buttercream cake. I really, really hope you've enjoyed this class. I hope you've really learned some good tips and good tricks. Please do feel free to message me on Instagram. There are going to be a lot more classes coming online, and I'm planning to do a ganache one next, so stay tuned.